exploring the intersection of resilient technology, organizations, and people. REdeploy.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. I'm Matt. I'm going to talk to you a bit about refactoring a community, or a rather non-traditional strategy to revitalizing a community that has a lot of latent potential and resiliency to it, and how the metaphor of maintenance mode can be applied outside of the technical realm, and you can bring it into other parts of your life. So this story, for me, the community that I care about, starts in 2011, a much simpler time, unlike today. And it starts with a lovely Canadian man named Sean Porter, who is just a leaf in the wind. He was looking to refactor his infrastructure, get to a place where it was slightly more resilient than the tooling that he was used to, Nagios being a very well-known and compliant standard for a monitoring solution. But he wanted to introduce another way of doing it. That project is called Sensu. And it's compliant with the Nagios API, and as well as some other projects, but it was designed to do a pub/sub model version of something that a lot of people were familiar with. But it started to gain a lot of momentum that in that simpler time, 330 stars, yes, it's a vanity metric, but it's actually a sign of some serious growth back then. And that's in no small part due to the amount of plugins that were available. The idea is that in order to be part of this community, you can work in your expertise and bring it to the framework, and plugins were the way to do so. The earliest contribution coming from James Turnbull, many of you may know, for the books that he taught all of us how to monitor appropriately and what sort of tools. He was involved since 2011. The IRC handler being the first one, which kind of set the stage for what community was. It's an IRC-based conversation. Fast forward to 2015, the project had taken off, and there are hundreds of plugins being added to the community, all into a single repository. Who knows how difficult it is to manage lots of different code in a single place? We make fun of mono repos all the time, not because it's wrong, but it ends up being a bit of a tragedy of the commit logs. Like, how do you actually go through this and parse out what update to do? And we love the maintainers that were participating in that, but that isn't an emoji for love. There were fewer than 3 maintainers for hundreds of plugins. There are a lot of people struggling to keep up with the demand of a necessary part of the project. So they decided to move from that mono repo, all these different pieces in one place, to a GitHub organization, a new construct at the time. So you have one massive thing, very difficult to manage, to 100+ little things. Better for commits, absolutely also a different problem to solve. So that's all to set you up for my story of last year when I was interviewing at Sensu. There's a really cool opportunity that the company had founded, Sensu Inc., to make a enterprise product on top of the open core and really build a community that, what's up? OK, check. Oh, all right, let's do this. So Sensu Inc. came to be. And with a little bit of funding to get it going, they decided to figure out how to revitalize the community in a measurable way, because to be honest, it had flattened out over time. There are a lot of different standards, there are a lot of different monitoring solutions out there, and the idea of, like, is there latent potential here that could help it grow and continue to be a consolidator of a lot of different communities into one place? And I mean, that's the hockey stick we're all after going for, and often VCs are looking for in either participation or ultimately in revenue. And the challenge was laid down to me: could you help do that? And I thought, yeah, maybe I could. There's some good groundwork. The growth was there. If we look at the vanity metric year over year, it's kind of interesting. It grew quite a bit. Still humble compared to some of the other, and definitely the de facto standard for the cloud native infrastructure. But my personal mascot's always been this guy, underdog for the win. Like, I like to be in the underdog situation. I want to see a little bit of competition that's a little harder. And also, the messaging around Sensu is what drew me in. It's this idea that monitoring love is the solution to monitoring sucking for all of us. That this idea that everybody who's an operations engineer has been struggling and is often seen as they're given crappy tools and they don't have any say about it. And open source is this methodology that allows us all to participate, but also it's this collection of tribal knowledge that we can all participate in. And that's what I love about it. And I loved how that was essential to Sensu's success, was can we instill a love for a product or a collection of products that are actually pretty hard to care about because people are often segmented off. They're one or two people that need to run gigantic infrastructures, and they're alone in a very real way. And I love that idea of bringing them together, giving them a shared voice. So I was talking to people at Monotorama 2017, asking them, why do you love Sensu? What does it do? What's different at all? And they talked about how it was better than Nagios in some way, and I'm like, in what way? And they couldn't really describe it. No one could really tell me why they cared. And I was left thinking that there must not actually be something here, and I should really consider my options and other startups to go to. But this hit home for me that people always said when they left one company and went to another, the first thing they set up was Sensu again. And that alone, they couldn't describe what the hell it did for them, but they said it was the first thing they did. And that's when I realized this whole monitoring love thing it's actually latent knowledge. There's a tribal edification happening in these plugins, in this ecosystem. And codifying that and collecting it in one place, we can actually build a community around this tribal knowledge. And that is what I wanted to try to do. And in there, there's latent resiliency. I think there was room for growth. There was room to reinvent. And I wasn't quite sure how we were going to get there because we were going a little slower than we needed to, but we also felt like we were drowning. So I signed up for something I wasn't quite sure I knew how to do. And I think in a way that is a form of leadership. And that's also an opportunity that startups give you. So yeah, so just kind of fake it till you make it and see if it could work and try to achieve that continued growth. So for me, it really, you have to reflect on where you're coming from. That when approaching a problem like this, yes, I could kind of tell you exactly how I would love a perfect community to run and all the pieces I'd put together, but that is outside of the context of what people are doing today. And if you're in charge of a community, if it's as small as a little open source project you started or as big as an entire company, if you're the leader of it, all of these things have human intention behind them that we have to map to, and we have to be able to improve upon, not rip apart and then replace, or you lose all the people that are on board already. So I went to the most boring of but useful of tools and just started interviewing people and recording it over and over again. These were the 8 questions I asked every single person I could find in commit logs in Sensu. It ended up being about 50 top contributors over the last 7 years. And it groups into, how were you participating? How actively are you? Are you struggling to find ways of helping others now? What's the best part? What's the worst part? And what can we fix? And through this practice of kind of boring, methodical outreach and connection to people, found 2 major themes, without a doubt. And they all stem from this idea that from the beginning, Sensu, the project and the Sensu plugins, since they were just 2 small repos that were really tightly coupled, there wasn't a great scope to them. The vision was really well aligned. But over time, and as people turned over in the plugins projects, and as Sensu continued to move forward, the vision drifted apart. So that led to technical debt, that there wasn't sufficient testing between releases of different plugins to the new updates to the framework, and a great deal of social debt. There is no communication happening. And I found in no time, the social debt was causing the technical debt. And I would urge you all to roll that around in your head and ask yourself, how much of things that I'm attacking with technical problems are actually social debt and need to be revitalized socially first, and then the technology will follow. Because I was surrounded by people that are way more technically talented than I'll ever be, and they all had the answers to the problems that they wanted to solve, but they literally couldn't figure out how to communicate it with each other. Like emails were insufficient. There is a single IRC channel, and way too much going on for that to be the solution on its own. So to get a little bit more concrete, since I'm being kind of abstract, let's talk about IRC. This was the most frustrating thing that was very consistent. A new user would join. Awesome, great new potential, lots of room for growth here. They'd ask a question, that's a very reasonable question, and within not too long of a time, a maintainer or contributor of some sort would get back to them and answer that question. But guess what? In those 7 minutes between that activity, the original user would leave. So for better or worse, IRC
doesn't require you to log into anything, and IRC Cloud, as common as it is for old school people or like even myself, not everyone knows to use it. So people would be talking past each other constantly, causing this frustration. And what I found is that the new person, when I found them and asked them questions, they said, no one ever answers my questions. I hate this product. And the maintainers were like, I answer people's questions all the time and they never appreciate it. I hate this frickin' thing. And you're like, wait, you're both actually doing what you need to, but the technology isn't serving us. Another common challenge in this IRC situation for us was that a maintainer would be asking for help. I have this PR. I don't know Graphite from a hole in the ground, but I think the code will work. Can somebody who knows Graphite like check it out for me? And then a little bit later, they'd ask, anybody? And then a potentially new contributor would be like, anybody what? What do you need from me? I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't want to belabor this too much, but the new contributor quits and they never come back either. It's like everyone ends up frustrated in this process. And I have my opinions here. I would have loved to do something that was more open source and try to solve it in different ways. And at first I thought I could be the solution, right? Like that's my job. I'm the VP of community. That means I fix all community problems. So I tried to start solving, yeah, thank you for laughing at that. That's a terrible joke. I thought I would just answer every question within a few seconds, and then that would be better. And I'd answer all the pull requests as they come in, and I'd start testing it all. And I realized I did improve the system, but to a maximum of +1. And we were growing at a pace where like +1 was really quite irrelevant. I was a rounding error in something that had a lot more potential to grow. So clearly that wasn't the answer. And ironically, I was burying the current maintainers in more work because like while I was very eager, I was also wrong sometimes. So they would end up correcting me. And they're like, damn it, I was about to review this PR, but instead I'm correcting you in this thing, and somebody's logging out, and it just ended up being the same circular problem. I was just trying to solve it a little bit faster. So, you know, really focusing in on why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we feel stuck? And no one felt like they had time to improve. It was the classic, I didn't put the image in here, but the person going by with the square wheel just being like, sorry, too busy to improve this. And somebody in just a moment of brilliance said, I wish I could put this crap in maintenance mode, right? Like, you know, working on servers and IT infrastructure, maintenance mode is a concept we're all familiar with. You say no IO for a while, give me some time, we're gonna do a thing, we're gonna make sure it works, and then we'll get back to you. And that was it, that was the moment, that's the end of my talk, thank you. No. No, so we decided, like, all right, well, what if we just branded this shit? What if it works and call it maintenance mode? And then there was the utter panic of why in the hell would anyone do this? Why would we enter maintenance mode? And the psychological concepts that come to mind, which are a theme of the show, right? Like, what holds us back psychologically? And the first and foremost is always sunk cost. We're terrified of the misconception that we're rational beings and we're weighing stuff out and it's going to be just fine when we make that rational call. But in truth, we're deadly invested in everything we do, and we'll die to keep moving something forward that is not serving us. And that is so true in our projects, in our work, in our personal lives. So we were terrified of sunk costs, so that made it an easy no. We shouldn't do this maintenance mode stuff. And then the other one is hindsight bias, that I think, you know, if you could project out into the future and look backwards, if this doesn't work, it's going to be pretty easy for me to feel like they should fire me. Like, this is kind of a weird idea. Maybe we shouldn't have done it. Clearly, it harmed us. And that was a very real fear, because every time we move forward, we look back and we judge it based on our current context. I think that's one of the most painful things we do to ourselves and to each other, is like judge yesterday's activities by today's standards. But then, what if we say, why not? Why don't we take a moment and say, why not? Why not go into maintenance mode? What would that look like? What we're doing to ourselves there, we're giving ourselves a bit of a narrative, right? And if I've learned anything that's effective in community building, if you can tell a story behind something, people will come along. Give it a name, give it a process, and lo and behold, it works. So narrative bias has been one of my superpowers. And yes, it's technically a fallacy, but I'm not above using a fallacy to make something better. Totally okay with that. And then the other one, what I just did by switching from red to green, same exact question, is the framing effect. What if we frame it as a positive? What if we frame something that feels absolutely crazy and dumb as innovative and thoughtful and pivoting? Like, we do that all the time in our industry. Like, that's what a narrative does. That's what we do to ourselves. And if we allow ourselves the framing of saying, I'm going to let go of something so that I can make it better, we can frame things in a way that gives ourselves permission. Because stopping is actually incredibly good when we stop. Because if you put something down, you can pick up something, and it might just be a little bit more effective. So we call that in technology a pivot. And if you listen to any startup podcast, you'll hear about all the brilliant pivots that people have made, aka their original idea failed and cratered and wasted a bunch of money, and lo and behold, they still ended up making money in the end. That's a pivot. So here's the plan. To get tactical, it meant we're going to leave all the PRs out there. Just say we're not going to deal with PRs for a while until we figure out what we're doing policy-wise, because that was taking up so much energy that we couldn't actually think about strategically where we wanted to go. I made a template of an answer for all issues. So as somebody asked the question, be like, sorry, we're not going to get back to you for about 3 months. And yes, that was terrifying to write, and I still am so thankful that people trusted that it would work. And then the third one is that all options are on the table. Let's really consider removing everything and seeing if starting fresh really helped us revitalize and if we can get somewhere. And where do we want to go? I think this, to the point of many speakers before me, if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will get you there, but that will also get you lost along the way. So you have to know where you're going and why. And for us, it was all about that lossy conversation in IRC was killing us. I was sure that that was a form of failure for us. We had no standard practices, so that mono repo to hundreds of repos cost us any form of continuity. So we had no release strategy, no Semver strategy that we all followed, no even templates replicated across. So I'm like, that's easy pickings. We can do that with a little bit of code and some time. And we had to increase our bullpen. I think open source maintainership should be a blast. It should be really fun. Yes, there's a little stressful, but we all like the challenge or we wouldn't be doing it. So if we're not having fun by ourselves, we probably need some friends, bring some new blood into it that will get us going. So the line in the sand we said was 10 people at a minimum in order to feel like we succeeded. And tackling the communication problem, here's my model that is not always accurate, but it's very helpful. That I think communication, when you're thinking about ways of framing it for a project, it's to break it out into these categories. We all have that fast-paced need to just have a casual discussion. I think it's essential to building a collective tribal instinct is to just be able to ask something very quickly and not feel like there's a high barrier of entry. That's synchronous communication. There's an async communication, which is I want a definitive answer. I don't want it to get lost in the noise. And there are tools that are very good at that. The ones that are good at that are often awful at synchronous, and vice versa. And I find that when consulting and helping people with community building, they misappropriate those two, and it causes them a lot of harm. And then lastly, I think we all need time face-to-face. If it was valuable, if we grew as much remotely, we'd all kind of hang out in our homes very comfortably, and we wouldn't come out to events like this. But we learn so much more when we're within each other's reach. There's just something powerful there that will never, escape. I think of it like a little sim bar across my head, where as I'm hanging out in person with you, my sim levels go up. And then when I go home, they slowly go down, and I have to go to the next conference to get them back up again. And then we all need news. We need to feel part of the system. If you kind of think anachronistically, we all had the local newspaper that brought us together and gave us a sense of identity. I think that's true for our communities as well. We need a news source. So some common choices across the board. I added Stack Overflow in there because you're a sponsor here. You're welcome. And some common options across the board here in a lot of communities. And then when I reviewed Sensu's, this is the assessment. We had IRC, we have our troubles with it, but that's our choice. Async, we had Google groups, but we didn't really utilize them very much. And then we didn't have any strategy for the bottom half, which I think was really preventing us from growing. So 6 months later, it took a while. It took longer than I thought it would, but most things, I don't know if you read 3 Cups of Tea or whatever book you want, but it will always take longer than you think it will. And when we got there, we got to a place that looked like this. We were using Slack as our primary synchronous channel. Async, kind of punted on Google Groups. We'll deal with that next time. But I added a repo on GitHub that is our primary channel that I'll walk you through. We do face-to-face remotely most of the time, and we've since added Sensu Summit, an event we have once a year, and we're thinking about smaller ones along the way, but our primary one is through video. And then we have multiple news sources because we have multiple personas in our community, and they all kind of consume information in slightly different and nuanced ways, so how to figure out a way to replicate it. The Slack thing. I know I'm talking about open source, I'm an advocate for it, and this is about as not open source as you can get. I get that. But all the user stories I just walked you through before are fixed when we use it. And for that, I unapologetically say it was the right choice. It got us from a pain point to a better place. And I would love to talk to you if you have other choices that you're making in your community about synchronous communication that is effective, because I have not found a very good solution for that, but this one has been working. On the GitHub side, so we made a community repository. This is not a new idea. A lot of community organizations do this, of having a repo that is just dedicated to project-wide conversations. So open issues like this, we have over 100 now of like guidelines to contribution, best practices in some nuanced special ways. Yes, it tends to duplicate some efforts around documentation and other things, but it gives everyone an idea of, if you open a question here, I guarantee I'll respond to it, because there's way too many other repos to look at and they're inconsistently followed. So if you're in a place where you're in a similarly stuck spot where you're like, we don't know exactly where to centralize people, just put a stake in the ground, make a repo called community, and then just point just to that. It's been shockingly effective, and I've done it a few times now. And the goal is that it's never the goal. Like, this is just a starting point, and then that information will go into a more mature documentation framework and a more mature kind of communication process. But in the meantime, it really gets you going. And then there's a perfect oxymoron to remote face-to-face, found in talking to the top contributors. They're all over the world. So in order to get us in a regular cadence, we did every other week, we do an informal community chat. I'd try to have an agenda and have something worth showing up for. It never got over 10 people. And that was fine. We just needed to consolidate those top-level contributors because they talked to another 100 people in their day-to-day usage. And that gave us some beacon of hope to scaling up. So we did these regularly. They're hard to do. It takes time, but it was very much worth it. And we're now thinking about the next iteration of what that looks like. And this is not a webinar. I like webinars too, but like that gets people in a very demand gen centric mindset. And I won't preach on how marketing is good, but not always the right answer. This is more of a community social hour. And it really helped us solidify our practices and talk through things that might have taken many months to work through. It took us 10 minutes on the video chat. And from there, like, I can declare this a success. We have over 1,000 people in our Slack group. We have now 5,000 plus people on our news list, on our mailing list, and in our Google groups. It's solidified the Sensu community in a way that previously in IRC, we only ever had a couple hundred people logged in persistently into it. So I can call this a win. I don't have to worry about hindsight bias biting me in the ass. But we're by no means complete. Like, that was just one iteration of many iterations in a project that will go on forever, because we got to some further step up in our hockey stick, but it's only a matter of time until it starts going to the right again. And the question is, how do we get the next burst of growth? And I love this because it's iterative and it's thoughtful, and it's about improving by becoming better, not by aiming for some sort of persistent perfection. Because nothing in our careers in technology will ever be perfect or done. It is a constant iteration process. And I found that better is so much more effective than perfect. And our messaging still was a struggle for many users, but just to complete that narrative as well, we did get to a slightly better talking point of thinking about Sensu as an event stream. So it's in a monitoring event pipeline of all these different formats of information is flowing through different states that you want all your monitoring events to go through, filtering out noisy ones, aggregating other ones, mutating data formats, and then handling that, sending it to places. So we now are play testing, calling Sensu a monitoring event pipeline. I'll be very open and say it might not last forever. We're play testing it, and it's working for people, and it's making sense. Seeing the agent as a producer of events and the Sensu framework as a consumer of events, I really like it. I love your feedback if you have questions or thoughts. But it's really about this. It's the iteration process. It's getting better at things and not forcing ourselves to search for perfection and only calling that the end. And it's about giving ourselves permission to do something a little bit differently and a little bit unconventionally at times in the search for that improvement. Because permission to stop is actually terrifying. We're really bad at it. We are really, really good at digging our heels in as human beings and just kind of persisting through something, but never giving ourselves permission. So I'm patenting it. Maintenance mode is pretty dope. If you're in a situation where you're not sure how to move forward, I challenge you to think of whatever metaphor works for you. Maintenance mode works really well in an operations world. I'm sure you can think of one in your own world where you can just say stop and stop doing anything and then move forward collectively. And the essentials I find have to do with giving it a name so that you have a narrative behind it, so that people can get on board. That alone will get you so many points. And then having a why, to the point of Vicky yesterday, like without any idea of why and a yardstick you're measuring against, you will flounder. If we didn't say that the persistence conversation was the main challenge of communication, we would have just really questioned ourselves into oblivion, just asking, well, what is the right answer, and never actually making a decision. And don't get me wrong, I did that for a couple months. But like when we actually put the stake in the ground, that was the problem. We found the best solution for it. And then permission, just that's purely psychological. It is unbelievably hard. It's sometimes organizational. If you're wondering how to bring this up to your team, I'm happy to work with you to do so. And I think there's great resiliency in this. I think stopping is another form of resiliency that I haven't heard as a theme yet. I'm by no means as expert on the subject yet. I'm very inspired by this event, and I want to dig in further. But I think stopping is one of the best things you could do to be resilient. I do know that less code is better than more. And I do know that less process can actually be really effective, and just giving yourself a break for a bit can be really effective. So I can tell you, we know it works for software. We've been doing maintenance mode in software for forever. I gave you one example of a community one. Companies do it all the time by pivoting their organization, and I think this really scales to people as well. And on that one, a bit of a personal note that, like, right now I've been going through a bit of a transition where my wife and I moved out to the West Coast and did a lot of work, and we thought we were ending up with a great career move and a great situation for us, and it ended up not working out very well. And the last couple of years have been a bit of a struggle, and I think it's worth admitting that. And well, the irony of it to me is that so effectively helping pivot the Sensu organization when I hadn't applied the same principles to my personal life. And that's something that's it's going to take a little bit to get used to and acknowledge that that was hard. But I think it's worth bringing up because if you look at social media and you look at companies, and you look how we're doing, we just see each other's highlight reels. And it's all really good, and everyone looks great, and we all enjoy each other on podcasts and videos and talking at conferences, but we don't talk about the hard stuff. So I can tell you, we hunkered down and thought if we just kept going, it'd be fine. And it's actually been really not working, and just recently, last week, decided to change it up. And we said, fuck it, we're gonna move, we're gonna change stuff. So moving from Portland and just saying screw it, we're going to stay with family for a while and change it up, and I'm lucky to work at an amazing company like Sensu, so I can work remotely and take some time off. As soon as this is over, doing an event next week, and then just taking a break and getting set up. And I'm gonna be a Midwesterner, so if you're in the Midwest, let me know. Yeah, I see some people, good. I need to make some new connects. 3, all right, let's talk. Last weekend, I brought my dog there, got her set up with family and everything, so we're starting to build a break, and I also want to give a pup date because that was a little intense. So as I was kind of sharing, I shared some details about this on Twitter, which amongst the chaos can actually be a wonderful place. And the takeaway was really just all these biases that we're talking about, like getting past them collectively, and giving ourselves permission to change can be really effective. So I really think resiliency is not about hunkering down and staying put and not changing. It's actually the opposite. It's having the strength to change. So with that, I just really thank you for your time, and I hope you have the strength to change as well.